Greetings, bike travelers and bike packers. Welcome to another episode of Chain Wheel Diaries, stories about bike travel told by the travelers themselves. I'm your host, Brian Berlin. Bike travelers and bike packers are very familiar with the acronym EFI. What's it stand for? Stay tuned and you'll find out. EFI originated with an epic bike ride from Cairo, Egypt to Cape Town, Africa. That's right, the entire continent from one end to the other. And this epic bike ride had never been attempted before and was entered into the Guinness Book. And the man who created that bike tour and founded TDA Global Cycling is today's guest, Henry Gold. Henry has led an extraordinary life. Here are just a few of his bona fides. He led a successful NGO in Ethiopia called CPAR, Canadian Physicians for Aid and Relief, to promote food security, health, sanitation, agriculture, water, and reforestation. He's a documentarian, having produced documentary films including Burden on the Land and AIDS in Africa, which was the first in-depth documentary on the AIDS crisis in Africa. And he's also crossed 6 continents by bicycle. Previous guests on this podcast have raved about TDA Global Cycling Tours. So I wanted to meet the man behind TDA and have him on the show so you can hear his stories as well. Now let's meet Henry Gold. Welcome to the show, Henry. It's nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure is mine.
Introduce yourself and where are you?
My name is Henry Gold. I live in Toronto, Canada. I was born in Czechoslovakia, or in Slovakia part nowadays. Came to Canada as a 16-year-old. Studied here, became an engineer, worked as an engineer. Then I set up an aid organization with a doctor, worked in Africa for many years. Then I worked in the voluntary section, environmental stuff, peacekeeping, stuff like that. And then in 2002, I started this new company called TDA Global Cycling.
I'm interested in the story that brought you from Czechoslovakia to Canada.
Well, I don't know as much of a story. It's my parents basically decided that. We emigrated. We actually emigrated from Czechoslovakia in 1965 legally to Israel. And then from Israel, 3 years later, we came here. I had an uncle living in Montreal who sponsored us. In those days, family reunification, if a family sponsored you, you could emigrate to Canada. So I had not much of a choice, but that's what happened.
Must have been quite an experience for you as a teenager.
Yeah, but you go along. You just whatever happens, you go with the flow. Essentially, you don't have a choice. Nobody's asking you what you want to do. I think it was different than nowadays, where young kids always ask for their opinions, and perhaps even have a veto power. We didn't have that. We were told and we were going to go, and that's it. So, yeah.
It's a tribute to your resiliency, which is going to come up later in the interview. But first, you were in the Middle East and you were having trouble getting out, I think due to the Iran situation. Is that the case?
Yeah, we had a tour. My company had a tour we crossed southern India, and then we had 3 weeks in Sri Lanka. And the tour finished essentially on Wednesday, 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And on Friday, myself and my wife flew to Doha, to Qatar, because she wanted to spend a day in Doha, Qatar. So we did. We had a wonderful afternoon and evening. In the morning, we got up, went to the airport, boarded the plane. The plane left right on time, and then about an hour into the flight, I saw a steward rushing very quickly towards the phone, and I was able to watch him because I was sitting not very far from him, and he was quite animated, and I knew something was happening. The plane wasn't doing anything funny, so I didn't think it was plane trouble. But I knew something was up. And then a minute later, I already ate my breakfast, actually. They were just, distributing the breakfast. And a minute later, they pulled the trolleys back, and people in the back didn't even get breakfast. And then the captain came on and basically said, unfortunately, the airspace has been closed and we have to go back to Doha. So that's it. So then we were stuck in Doha for a week or 8 days, trying to, just waiting to see what happens. There were no flights going out. There were no organized departure overland as well. People individually were hiring cars or taxis and trying to get into Saudi Arabia. Obviously, depends how panicky you were and depends how rich you are, because it's an opportunity for people to make money, obviously. And there's an element of danger too, because both Qatar and Saudi Arabia, there are oil drill all over the place, and there's refineries and there's all sorts of stuff. So, given the strategy of Iran to hit the infrastructure, I mean, there's some element of danger, but there's an element of danger being in a hotel too. So, people took their chances. Anyway, last Monday we got Sunday actually. Canadian Embassy organized some buses to take us out to Riyadh. It was a 13-hour trip, and then we ride there. When we got to Riyadh, we went to the airport because we already booked it. I booked a flight at 1 o'clock in the morning. We got to the airport in Riyadh, and 1 o'clock, nothing was happening. At 1:30, the captain came and on the speaker. We were not on a plane. We were in a waiting room saying the airspace is closed. And we're going to have to wait to see what happens. We got into the air, but an hour into the flight, the captain announced, we're not going to London, we're going to Cairo. So we went to Cairo, and then a few more hours waiting in Cairo, and another flight took us to London. And then we missed our flight from London to Canada, so we had to spend another night in London, and eventually made it home.
You lead an adventurous life, which brings us to the improbable history of TDA. And I know you've told this history many, many times, but I'd like to hear it again. How you came up with the idea for this epic bike ride. Despite the odds, you were able to pull it off and had some people join you. And it is the signature tour of TDA Global Cycling. You started very late in life. You weren't an experienced cyclist, and yet you came up with this route that went from Cairo to Cape Town.
I was not a cyclist in a sense that I was not a touring cyclist. I was a commuter cyclist. And I had a bicycle since I was a kid in rural Slovakia, and used it all the time to fool around and travel to other villages and hanging out with friends. And then later on in Canada, I just use it, kind of as I said, a bit of a commuting, bit of on the weekend, go for a little ride or something like this. So I was not a cyclist. Well, the idea came up sort of coincidentally. I was working, as I mentioned, I set up an organization that worked in Africa, and we were doing all sorts of developmental projects. And I recall when this whole thing started was in Ethiopia, where women carry everything on their back. They go out of the city to look for wood, and then they walk 2 hours, 3 hours back, and they sell the wood and make a little pennies, and this is what they live on. And you see a lot of this everywhere in Ethiopia, in fact, and just all over Africa. This was the nature of transportation, unless you were richer, and for the super wealthy had cars. But most people were either donkeys, horses, or on their back. Um, And having background in Eastern Slovakia after the war, and of course having an engineering background as well, and knowing how India developed and how China was developing using bicycles, millions of bicycles, I kept thinking that Africa needs the same thing. They need these poor people to change their life. They need cheap bicycles. And bicycles were available, but the same cheap bicycle in India that would cost $35 in Ethiopia and Kenya would be $150 to $250, which was, significantly more expensive. It was really not affordable for most people. So I kept saying to whenever I met developmental people, NGOs, others, that what Africa needs is cheap bicycles, and somebody should set up a factory here and start manufacturing cheap bicycles. Then, coincidentally, someone who I knew who came to ask me for a job was a fellow from Toronto here who had an MBA. And I said, I don't have a job for you, but I have this crazy idea. I'd like to do a feasibility study of what would it take to set up a factory in Nairobi, bicycles. And I said to him, so I don't have a job, but I think I can raise money to send you to do this feasibility. Are you interested? And to my surprise, he said yes. And so we raised enough money to send him for 6 months to Nairobi to do a complete assessment, what it would take, how much it would cost, etc., etc. And he came up with a document, and we started talking about this. He even met some local investors who were interested in putting money into this. So it started looking serious. And when we kind of started thinking, well, can we do this? At one point, he says to me, okay, Henry, well, how are we going to market this? Since we don't have any money even to start this company, how are we going to market it? And I kind of burst out. And I said, oh, that's the easy part. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, we're just going to organize a crazy bicycle race across Africa from top to bottom on these single speed bicycles. And we're going to call it, after Tour de France, we're going to call it Tour d'Afrique. And, he started laughing and I was laughing. We were all kind of having fun with this and not really taking it seriously. But that's the original concept. Then he actually quit on me. As much as he was telling me I wasn't serious, it was him who wasn't serious. He got a job at Deloitte, I think, that paid him $50,000, $60,000, which was a lot of money for Nairobi in particular. And although he almost told me he wanted to be an entrepreneur, once he realized the entrepreneur may not get enough to eat for a year or two or three. So he quit on me. I was busy. I was running the NGO. I was also doing some documentary film. I had lots of things on my plate. So I just put it aside. I said, well, we have a nice document. Maybe something will happen with this one day. And then I don't know, a year later or so, a board member of my organization came to me and he says, Henry, there's a cyclist here, a fellow in Toronto, who wants to meet you. He just came back from Nairobi. He's very keen. He heard about you. He's very keen to meet you. So I said, sure, let's have a coffee. And we met. And at that point, he said to me, he was a real cyclist, a racer and a cyclist. And in fact, he was working. He manufactured a little product for the cycling industry. Um, and he was Dutch Canadian. His mother was Canadian and his father was Dutch. So and they were divorced. So he kind of spent both places. And when we were sitting and having a coffee, he said to me, well, Henry, the idea of setting up a factory, forget about it. He said, the Chinese and the Indians are going to eat you alive. See, there's no way you can compete with them. He said, yeah, you'll manage to put up bicycle cheaper for a year, two, three, and then it's going to lower the prices. They're going to lower the prices. They're going to lower the prices, and you're going to have to give in. And then they go back to what they do before. He said, they have the resources, you don't. There's nothing you can do about it. But then he said, but I love the idea of organizing a trip across Africa, a race across Africa. So again, I sort of smiled, thinking about this was, well, yeah, it's a great idea, but is it really serious? Can we actually do this? But I said to him, he started asking me all sorts of questions. So I said, I actually thought about it. I said, it's doable. Logistically, it's doable. I explained to him how it could be done. And that was it. That was kind of a couple of hours we spent together. Then a couple of weeks ago, a couple of weeks later, he called me up and he said, Henry, come, let's have another coffee. I have something to show you. And so I said, sure. I have kind of a management experience that when you see initiative, you want to see, you want to exploit that initiative. So he came and he had a mock brochure. He had a mock brochure he was showing me. It was, with all the ideas that I mentioned to him, etc., etc. And at that point, I said, "Hey, wait a second. Maybe there is something here. Maybe, maybe we should do this." But again, I was still very busy, and we sort of started playing with the idea of what are you going to do. This was 1993, before internet existed, really, in a sense of what it was. And so we realized that in order to do this, we're going to need to find a big sponsor who's going to put some money to do, marketing of brochures, printing brochures. We're going to need thousands of brochures to get this idea out. So we started, looking at it seriously, and but then there was this horrendous massacre in Egypt. There was about 45 or so German tourists were killed. And that happened. We sort of looked at each other and said, well, this is, you want to find a sponsor right now. Well, let's just put it aside for a year or two and see what happens. And so we did. And then, but then life takes over. I got busy with other things. I left the country. He got into a very serious car accident, spent 6 months in a hospital. Things just happen, and so, but periodically we would speak on the phone or have a coffee and say, well, what do you think? What do you think? Are we going to do this? And as I said, things, but 10 years later, about 10 years later, 1992, I had a project that fell apart because of 9/11. I was not working, and I was, I turned 50, and I said, what am I going to do with my life right now? I didn't want to work anymore in the NGO world, and I did not want to, and I didn't think I was employable, and I didn't really want to work for anybody because I was just, kept doing things on my own. So I kept.
And you're 50 years old.
I'm 50 years old, thinking I'm broke, by the way. And thinking, what am I going to do? So I looked at my ideas, bunch of ideas, went through it, and I said, well, let me call Michael. And I called Michael, and I said, Michael, it's now or never. I'm 50. If we're going to do this, let's do it now, or we're just going to put it aside. It's one of those fantasies that never happens. And he said to me, give me a day or two. And then he called back, and he said, let's do it. And that's basically how it started. Cairo to Cape Town, and literally, I think it was on my birthday, 50th birthday, when we decided to go ahead with it. And then less than a year later, we were standing in front of the pyramids with 31 other cyclists from around the world, going on an adventure that has never been done before. A lot of skepticism, a lot of apprehensions on a lot of people, including myself. But I used to say that Nike stole my slogan, because I used to say, let's just do it. We'll find out if it's doable or not. That's how it started.
I think that for our geography challenged listeners, it's hard to fathom this bike route from the very northern part of Africa to the very tip of it. That's a huge amount of distance and over 3 months, almost 4 months of riding.
Yeah, the original one literally was Cairo to Cape Town. It was exactly 4 months, 120 days, I should say. We actually approached Guinness at that time, whether they would be interested in setting up a record for this under a rubric of human power crossing of Africa. And they were interested, and they created a criteria how to do it, which basically said you have to be on a bicycle every inch of the way. If you're not going to be on a bicycle, then it doesn't count. And so we essentially created what at that point what we called EFI, every fucking inch. Yeah, and that was the concept. So we actually, today it's not doable because both Sudan and Ethiopia are in, I mean, there's a war going on. But when we did it, there were restricted areas, very restricted areas. All of Egypt was restricted. Sudan was partially. Ethiopia, northern Kenya was completely off. But when I say restricted, it was you were allowed to do it in convoys, car convoys, or bus convoys. I managed to convince the authorities. I shouldn't say I managed to. I managed to get permits that we didn't have to do it. So we actually did it on our own pace. And the roads were empty, completely empty. Just us on bicycle, and then once a day or twice a day, there would be a convoy of 30, 40, 50 vehicles going by and looking like, what the heck are these people doing? Because it wouldn't be as a group either. It would be a cyclist, and 500 yards, there would be another cyclist and another cyclist, and so on. It would be spread over, 15 miles, 20 miles, maybe more. But that was the beauty of it, that we managed to get permits to go to this restricted area and establish this record. And then for years and years it was fine, but in the last 2 3 years it's fallen apart because of Sudan and civil war in Ethiopia, civil war in Sudan, and who knows where else they're going to be wars.
Not only was this the first iteration of TDA, but it was also historic because you are in the Guinness Book, I believe.
Well, we were. Now people have broken the record.
Okay.
It became a kind of a thing for many people to do, and initially people would be in touch with us, asking us for advice, help, to cross borders, etc. And we just got tired of it. There are too many people asking to do this, and everybody came with a nice excuse. I'm doing this for charity. I'm doing this for that. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Your first TDA got off to an inauspicious start. The first day, you're suffering from a head cold, I believe, and the tour guide drops out during lunch. And now you're faced with maybe a small mutiny of riders that are thinking, might be time to bail out, but you convince them to keep going.
Yeah, I didn't do any convincing. What happened was that, as I said, I wasn't a cyclist, so I had no idea what I could do. Would I cycle half a day? Would I be able to cycle more than that? I had no idea, and particularly the last 3 weeks, I even more, I think a month. I went to Nairobi to meet the vehicles, and we sort of drove up to Egypt with the vehicles. And so I wasn't cycling, I wasn't doing anything, I wasn't in shape. In fact, I think I lost 20 pounds just going from Nairobi to Egypt. Very little food because of the nature of how it was. So yeah, so the first day, I mean, I'm going to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning and getting up at 5, um, having a cold, being quite stressed because the vehicles only got a permit literally like 2 days before. We didn't have confirmation. In fact, we were told we're not going to get a permit. But somehow again, luck looked at us and we managed to do it. So I'm quite stressed about it because neither me or my partner had any background in dealing with public like this or tourism or anything. So we decided, we should hire a tour leader who will be kind of on a bicycle. He will be in the crowd, and we looked up. So anyway, I get to lunch. I'm the last person getting to lunch. I'm tired, and at that point, I'm thinking to myself, I'm just going to get into the vehicle. Half a day was enough. I'm going to get into the vehicle. So I get there, and to my surprise, there's a dozen people sitting around, including the so-called tour leader. And they're just kind of loitering around. They should have been, I was slow, and so I don't know what they're doing. But I'm hungry. I picked up my sandwich. I'm eating my sandwich, and I'm sort of thinking, okay, I'm going to just tell people they got to move on. Lunch is over. And as I'm thinking, I'm just kind of ready to get up. There's a commotion in front of the truck. I go see what's going on, and our official tour leader is out, completely unconscious. I think the heat and the stress, and never been to Africa, and he probably just didn't realize what he gets himself into. He was out. So we had a medic, a nurse. Um, she was there, and I immediately we kind of picked him up, put him in a truck, revived him, get him some water, and then the nurse kind of took over. And then I was going down the stairs of the truck, and I see these dozen people just looking at me, kind of in shock. And I realized that if somebody offers them a ride to the airport, they're all going to jump on and go home.
How do you like the interview so far? If you like it, please support my effort to keep publishing this podcast. The best support you can provide is to subscribe. That way you'll be notified when a new episode drops. Tell your friends, leave comments, share the link. These are all good ways to help me promote Chain Wheel Diaries. Also, if you're a bike traveler, bike packer, or bike adventurer, and you have stories to share, drop me a line, Brian Berlin at chainwheeldiaries.com. Link below. And thank you very much for listening. Now back to the show.
So I figured I have to do something, or this tour is over right here. And so I started debating with myself, what are you going to do? And I don't know what you're going to do. You got to do something. and you know how you have two little guys on each shoulder, and said, well, you can't do anything. You're exhausted. You're going to die. You can't do this. And I said, well, I have to do something. Anyway, at that point, I realized, well, I better just say, lunch is over. Follow me. We're going to cycle. And thinking in my mind, how am I going to do this? I can't, I could hardly make it to lunch. How am I going to do this? But anyway, I said, everybody, let's go follow me. And I said to myself, okay, that'll be 5 kilometers. And they're fast riders. I'm slow. They're just going to leave me. They're going to get tired of being in my company, and they're just going to take off. Well, 5 kilometers passed, and nobody, they're kind of cycling with me. Another 5 kilometers, they're still with me. Another 5 kilometers, and I'm like, oh, Jesus, and I'm just like, I can't do this. But, you just dig in deep and say, yeah, you're going to do what you have to do. And then towards the end, of the day, they did take off, and I was the last one coming in. It was already kind of close to sunset. And, I had my dinner. And then I lay in my tent, and all of a sudden, thinking I'm lying on the tent, I say, you know what, this wasn't so bad. Maybe I can do this again tomorrow.
What was the makeup of the first participants in that first TDA?
Well, with a cross section, there was a literally cross section. The best cyclist we had there was actually a fellow who was in his mid-30s, I think, maybe even younger, who used to be on the UK national cycling team, and he was definitely, without any doubt, the strongest, and his technique and smooth, etc. So he was kind of the one. There was at least another fellow from Austria who was on the same level, more or less. And then there were people who were older than me, who came, who heard me talk on CBC radio, and that, I'm inexperienced, that I don't, that I'm not a real cyclist, but I'm going to do this. So there are people who basically says, I'm a cyclist, but I'm older, but I'm going to do this. And so we had a whole spectrum, really, of the youngest person that we had was 18, whose parents funded this. And I think the oldest was in the 60s. So there was a whole spectrum, and it was a spectrum of people. We had people from Holland, from Belgium, from Austria, I mentioned, from Switzerland. We had several Dutch people, and then Canadians and Americans. I think that was it in the first group. So it was a very nice international group. There were mostly men, but there were 25% females, I think. So that was nice as well. The staff was also international, South Africans, some Americans, some Canadians, some Dutch. So it was a very interesting group, as I said, from all over the world, and a lot of apprehension. I mean, towards the end of the trip, three people confessed that they thought they're coming to die to Africa. I mean, and they said it with tears in their eyes. I think they were relieved. I never thought we are endangering our lives. I knew there were all sorts of, I knew Africa. I worked in this place. I mean, one of the reasons I managed to get those permits is because simply I worked in some of these countries, and I simply knew the right people. And these people simply helped me get those permits. So I knew what I was getting myself into, but that doesn't mean that I thought we can do it, because crossing borders, it's all unpredictable. Crossing borders and coming across people who are going to, show you their rank, and they're going to say you can't do this or you cannot do that, etc. On the other hand, I did a lot of homework because I knew what it takes to get this thing done. So I met with the ambassadors, I met the right people, and I told them what we're going to do, and how we plan to do it, and that we need their support, and that we need to inform them. So I was, there was a lot of transparency from the beginning. And because of people who knew who I was and the work I did in Africa, so there was no, how should I put it? I brought a lot of money into Africa and developmental work. So they knew I didn't come here, I didn't go there with some sort of a hidden agenda, to exploit, and, I don't know, that I'm working for the FBI or someone. And so obviously that's, without me working in Africa, this would have never happened, without any doubt.
How
Uh,
soon after you completed the first one did you think you would be doing another one?
well, it's a good question. Me and the partner we're not getting along together. It was to me very obvious that, it's like when you get married, you very quickly realize you chose the wrong partner. Now you have to figure out a way out. So it was obvious that this is not going to work out too well. So I actually had no plans of doing anything. After it was done, I took a holiday. I went in South Africa. I met my girlfriend. We went for a little holiday. We had a good time, etc. And I sort of said, "Well, I'll come home and we'll deal with this." But when I came home, my partner was already, people were registering for the next one. It was 8 months later. There were all kinds of people who were registered, and he was gang ho, and he was behaving himself, and he was into it, etc. So I said to myself, you know what, like in a bad marriage, just said, well, let's give it another try. And we did. So literally 8 months later, we had another group of 33 people who signed up. Um, and the idea was I wasn't going to lead. We were going to split the leadership. He was going to do half, and I was going to do half. But things started falling apart when he was there, and even before we got there, we started arguing on the phone, and he just became very nasty and started giving me ultimatums, etc. And I basically said, okay, well, this is it. I'm going to do what I have to do because I'm committed. I'm committed to all these cyclists, and that we're going to close the company at the end of second year. And basically, we pulled it up second one. And then when I came back from Cape Town, he was ready to start registering people for the third year, etc., etc., as if nothing happened. And he said, I have no problem working with you. He says to me, I said, well, Michael, I have a problem working with you. This is over. It's not
So
going
now
to.
you're on your own.
Well, then we had to figure out what, because now he wanted to make money out of this somehow. So, and he started telling me, this is your value. I'm going to sell the company. I said, fine, go ahead, sell it. Find a buyer. And then he stopped working. And in the meantime, I figured, well, if you're going to sell it, you have to have something concrete, which is, people registering and people, etc. So anyway, I was running the company for 9 months while he was doing nothing. And then at that point, I figured, okay, this was, the third tour was on the go. I actually had hired a tour leader there. I was sitting at home. He was doing nothing at all. He didn't come out to his office. And I was just gonna, the third year was gonna be the end of it. I was gonna just close the company, and that was it. Because I realized there's no way he's gonna sell this to anybody. There was no, But then he started sort of saying, "Well, Henry, why don't you buy it out from me?" He said. So I said, "Okay, I'll give it." I gave him a kind of what I thought it was worth, which wasn't much. He said, "No, I'm gonna buy it from you." He says, "For the same money." I said, "Fair enough. You pay me for 9 months of work because you didn't do a fuck all. You pay me the 9 months, and I'll give you, plus the money, etc." He said, "Not true. I work for 9 months. What do you do? I try to sell the company." So this is work. Anyway, this went on for weeks, months. And at the end, he suggested a mediator. We were going to meet the mediator. And the day we were going to meet the mediator, I got a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning from Africa. One of our riders got a heart attack and died.
Hmm.
He actually died, not riding. He was actually in a vehicle. He just got up in the morning. He must have not felt well. And he died literally in a vehicle. He died at a massive, massive heart attack. So I emailed to the mediator saying, "I'm sorry, we had a death. Somebody died on the tour. I have to deal with this. I'm not coming to the meeting." At that point, Michael panicked and he said, "Okay, company is yours."
Oh, interesting.
He basically said, "All right, I'll, whatever I offered him," he said, "I'll take that offer." And that was it. So he panicked. And I sort of, at that point, I almost wanted to be a son of a bitch. I said, "No, I'll give you half." But but I changed my mind. I said, "You know what? For the little money, get this thing over." Anyway, so I bought the company from, his half of the company. That's what happened. And then from then on, I was, a free man. I could do whatever I want, the way I wanted, my style. I could hire the people I want. That's how it worked.
You've done a handful of TDAs and now you're expanding. Take me through the growth of the company and how you began to add additional tours and how you decided what kinds of tours you were going to offer.
Well, again, the grain of the idea started actually towards the end of the tour, the first tour. I was, there was we call ourselves a backpack. There was a group of 4 or 5 of us who were taking it really slow and just enjoying ourselves, going in, coming to dinner kind of late, just before sunset. And then we were already in South Africa. We only had a few more days to go. When one of them pulled beside me as I was cycling on this dirt road, and he said, "Henry, okay, this is done. What's next?" Uh, and I don't know what possessed me. I just blurted out. I said, "Well, what's next?" Silk Route, of course. What other famous kind of a road there is in the world that you want to do? So I said Silk Road. And again, that's a Greenway idea because when I actually, after I split with Michael, I sort of started thinking, okay, well, I knew how vulnerable Africa was. So I figured we got to start putting other tours here. If this is going to be a real business, you can't depend on one product. But instead of, because it was already late in Silk Road, it requires much more in-depth preparation. I thought, well, why don't we do a trip in Europe first? And that was the Orient Express. So we did we literally did a trip. We only put it up in, I think, in March. And by summer, we didn't have a big group, but the idea was let's just get it done. So that was the second trip. And then third trip was then the Silk Route. And then, you just kind of, when you do these things, then you think, okay, what would be another interesting trip and what should we do? So one of my staff person kept talking about wanting to do South America. And so we finally said, all right, let's do South America. So I think that was our fourth trip, South America. And then it's just, the people I'm surrounded with, everybody has ideas for kind of trips that they would like to do. The area of the world, but basically, how after we did the three big trips, Silk Route, Africa, and South America, I had this concept that I kind of borrowed from the Seven Summits. And I thought, well, why don't we create seven epic bicycle tours around the world that hopefully will be, will become iconic in a way. Seven summit, the climbers have seven summits, and that's when we started, looking at North America, South America trips, and we put in the Bamboo Road, which was from Shanghai to Singapore. And then we created the Transoceania, which the first one was across Indonesia and then across Australia. So these were kind of the seven summit concept. And now we had, this essentially almost covering the whole world. And we were kind of hoping that this, we will market the seven epics as compared to just one tour. And that will get enough both publicity, but also people who would want to sign up for the seven epics. And we did, but it didn't take off in a way I sort of was hoping. And then eventually we started dropping this whole seven epic concept. We just stopped mentioning it. But the idea of doing tours was already, keep coming up with new tours was part of the ethos of the company. So, as we speak, there'll be a new tour announced soon. We keep coming up with new ideas, and then the format changes. Now they're shorter, not necessarily the epics. The epic has become very problematic because of geopolitics. Our Silk Road is interrupted now. We cannot go through Iran. We cannot go through Russia. And so that's one reason where these epics are not working. But people also don't like to go away for 4 or 5 months. It's too long. And although they can come on segments, and many do, it's still people prefer kind of the 6, 8 weeks, 10 weeks tours, kind of to go away from the family. Beyond that, it becomes much more challenging for people. They just don't want to leave their homes for that long. So anyway, so we have a lot of wonderful adventures around the world. I just came from one, and the first trip in India, we call it the Tea Route, which crossed southern India and Sri Lanka. It was a wonderful trip. I had a great time. Last summer, we had a new trip called Olive Route, which went from Athens to Lisbon. This summer we have a new tour in Scandinavia. Starts in Helsinki, goes to Norway in the north. So we keep coming up with ideas like that, and then we debate it endlessly in our office about the route, about the attraction, about will there be an interest? Will there not be an interest? One of the trips that we put up called the Plum Route, also for next year, which is starts in Poland, Gdansk, and goes all the way to Thessaloniki in Greece. And we call it the Plum Route based on, I grew up in Slovakia where the plum alcohol called Slivovitz. So we kind of try to base it around the Slivovitz concept. So far, it's not attracting too many drinkers. But that's what we play. We play with teams. We play with areas, like the Silk Route is a team of a sort. That's how we come up with the trips. And as I said, if you ask all my staff, the part-timers who do contracts and we have many of them who've been with us for many, many years, to the full-timer, what's their favorite thing to do is to come up with a new tour and scout it.
So you did, I believe you did 13 tours in 2025. Do you have the same number in 26?
I think it varies between 11 to 13 per year. And that's just because of the scheduling and the length of the tours. Also, only some of the tours are once a year. The African one is once a year. Japan is once a year. But most of the tours are, every 2 years. Some we are now doing only every three. There's some of the epics are only every 3 years, just because there's just not enough people to sustain it. And it actually, it's also the challenge of it, as far as logistics and preparation for us. It takes tremendous efforts, this very long trip. In fact, financially, they're not as rewarding as some of the shorter trip for us as a business. So you have to kind of take that into account if you're going to do it. So yeah, having said that, there are people who are very interested in those epic trips. We just had one individual who had done his fourth epic trip at the age of 76, and he was not even a cyclist at the age of 70. So you get all kinds of people. I was on a trip right now with an American fellow who signed up one trip after another, just one after another. He's going again, 75 years old, one after another. So it's actually great to see people in their 70s, which obviously healthy and in good physical shape. And this is kind of their retirement now. They have, and we have such a wonderful time on it that I don't blame them. You just get, as one of them said, it's just addictive. It's an addiction, he said. So
We've
you
had
have to,
participants, I think, that have never attempted anything like this, and it's been a life-changing experience.
oh, many, many. I have been getting, it's going to my head now. My wife says to me, I over the last few years, I'm getting people telling me and sending me emails or saying, "Henry, you changed my life. You changed my life." And it's and what's nice about it is people who are not in their 20s, or 30s. There are people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s who says that just made me so much more aware about the world and adventures and yeah, I mean, for me it's a great pleasure to see this because, as I said, it really, how should I put it, makes a lot of people very happy. And it makes sense. We go through life, we have all our defeats, we lose partners, we get divorced, we get all sorts of stuff. And now you retired, semi-retired, you've been successful, you have some financial resources, but you may or may not have kids, and the kids may be living in California or God knows where. You see them once or twice a year. Um, and now you come on a trip like this, like an epic trip, for example, where you have a community, you're not alone for a minute, and you have a community of like people, likable people, and you share certain adventures, and it's just a one long high. It's just tremendously, and because you're physically active, you're producing all those wonderful chemicals that are so good for you. So yeah, as I said, I when we first did this, it was a challenge. I was never thinking any of those things that happened to it now.
I've interviewed two people who have both commended TDA Global Cycling tours, and they both did the South Korea to Japan. They both were incredibly impressed, especially in Korea, with the bike infrastructure of that country. How did you choose that as one of the rides?
Well, as I said, we come up with a concept, and the concept was let's do a trip in Korea and Japan. And then you start researching where you want to go. You give yourself some key element or key point where you want to visit, and then you try to find a way of doing it. Connecting to those key points. So you want to be in Seoul. We knew we want to be in Busan, which was the end point, simply because the original concept is we were going to take a ferry from Busan to Japan. So we knew we wanted to end. So then it was a question. Okay, uh, now, how are we gonna? What route are we gonna get there? What other interesting thing on route? And then you start researching it. Both nowadays it's easier with the internet, but you have books, you have travel books. So we spend a lot of time looking at this research. We usually assign one person who does that, and then a person come up with a format with the basic route. Then we all look at it. We have suggestions. Some of us already been in that area, so we have kind of a comments about it. Sometimes we change the whole aspect. Sometimes it ends up that there are some issues that are big obstacles. But in any case, after we do that, we send a couple of people now to check it out to see if it's working, and really they are the final say in a way because they can come up and say, "Hey, Henry, this is a disaster." I mean, in the first few tours, I was doing that. And I would be doing scouting before, um, except for Africa. I wasn't really scouted much at all. But I would scout it, and then I could change my mind when things didn't work. Nowadays, the actual team that goes there, they come back and they make the final suggestion. And again, we go through it, debate it. Why did you change? What happened, etc. There's a lot of information nowadays. It's all, but you got to do your homework. You know, one of the things that used to make me kind of smile was a lot of younger people, in particular, who want to do what we did and would ask us for all kind of information. They didn't want to do their homework; they wanted it on a plate.
Mm, sure.
Tell me what I should do. tell me, tell me how I should cross how I should cross the border. Tell me this, and often the information is on our website. Just do this, just research it. But it's easier to ask for someone. Nowadays, also people ask us, "Would you sell us the route?" They come in because we have the ride with GPS. It's all, and they come. Can you sell me the route? And I said, "No, I'm sorry, that's not for sale." But there's a lot of information now. So on the other hand, my approach in the old days was particularly, part of the fun was not knowing exactly what you're going to do, how it's going to end up. That look at the maps, you're going to get lost. That's great. You're going to have an adventure. Nowadays, it's, and I tell people nowadays, you're not really lost. You just don't know where you are. And that's not being lost because there are people around you that are going to help you. You're not lost. Lost is somewhere in the jungle when there's nobody there to help you. But taking your own road, you're not lost. You're just going to have to spend more time finding your way back. But that was the old days. Nowadays, it's very different with the ride with GPS and with the phone in your hand and
Much
way.
different than your first tour.
Oh man, completely different. Completely different. Yeah.
If someone is a casual bicyclist, now they've got the time on their hands, and they're interested in a tour like TDA offers. Would there be a particular type of tour you might recommend to somebody who's never done this before?
They're all doable. It just depends on your personality and the proclivity. What do you like? I'm kind of like a missionary nowadays. I keep telling everybody can do it. Anybody. You don't have to be a cyclist. You don't have to be an athlete. And I tell this because I've seen it myself. I've seen people who have absolutely no background, not in physical activities, people who came overweight, all kinds of, and I've had people who are fantastic physical condition who fall apart because they think they can do anything so quickly, etc., etc., and then they disrespect the environment. They disrespect, a lot of the stuff, and they fall apart. So anybody can do it. How? Do it nice and easy. Don't go.
5 kilometers at a time.
Yeah, yeah. And guess what? We have and I say anybody can do it because we have set up a structure right now that if you're having a hard day, if you're just starting out, you can get off at half a day. Do a half a day. Just stretch yourself for the first time. You're gonna do first day. The way I put it to anybody who is kind of interested, even if you're not a cyclist, when I said, a cyclist, 20 kilometers sounds a lot to you. I said, okay, it's walking. You in the States, right?
Yes.
Yes, I'll start talking in miles. Yeah, I said, is walking 3 miles too much for you? But a very slow pace. Is that too much for you? Well, if you can do 3 miles, can you do 5 miles? Okay. Now you get on a bicycle. You don't have to be in shape. You don't have to be an athlete to walk 5 miles. Anybody can do it, especially if you give yourself 3 hours to do it. You can do it. A child can do it. So if you're on a bicycle, you're always able to do 3 times what you can walk. So if you can walk 5 miles, so you can start the first day, you can do 15 miles on a bicycle without really being tired. Just nice and easy. You're not racing. Not easy. Give yourself time because that's the key. Now, if you can do that, then tomorrow you can do 6 miles. The day after, you're going to do 7 miles. and you're not even going to notice. Well, now our bicycles, this is exactly what happens. People come in and they don't start with 5 miles. They start with 15, 20, 25 miles. And they realize, hey, that wasn't so bad today. Well, tomorrow I'm going to do 30 miles. Within 2 weeks, they can do guaranteed 60 miles a day, guaranteed, no matter how heavy you are. Now, I'm not talking about going through in the Rockies. I'm
Hmm.
talking about starting on a tour. So if you ask me which tour, don't start on a tour which starts with heavy climbs. Start with a tour which has first 10 days or so flat terrain or fairly flat, etc. If you take that into account, then anybody can do it all. And in fact, if anything, what happens over and over in our tours is people are always telling me, I had no idea I could do this. I never had a perception that I could do stuff like this. And they are in their 60s, 50s. And as I said, there are people who are overweight, people who come and lose 50, 20, 30 pounds. They feel great about themselves. So anybody can do it. The trick is when I say anybody can do it, do you really want to do it? Because when people tell me I could never do it, I said, you already made up your mind. So
Yeah.
why should I convince you?
I want to point people to your website, tdaglobalcycling.com. It is a rich portal of information about your tours, what to expect, what kinds of tours are available, what kind of equipment, logistics, packing, literally everything that somebody might have a question about has been answered in some form or another on the website. So I definitely think people should visit that. Parting shot, I'm 74. Am I too old to do one of your epic tours?
No, I came on 3 months ago, 4 months ago, on a tour in Japan called the Island Hopping. We had an American fellow there. He was 84 years old.
Wow.
Now, mind you, he did come with an e-bike, but he was a cyclist who used the e-bike literally just to help him up the. He only had, the supplemental battery that Trek
Yes.
bicycle have it. So he brought two of those to
Yeah.
help him to go up the mountain.
Yeah.
Not once did he use both of them. So he was literally using it together. At 84 years old, I was so impressed. But he's not the only one. We have had people in the late 70s and early 80s, even without the batteries. These are exceptions, no doubt. They're lucky. They're the top 1% in many ways because they have the cognitive and they have the physical and they have the desire and they're open to the world, etc. So these are exceptions. But my grammar teacher in Slovakia would tell me exception only prove the rules. The rule is you can do it.
Very well. Henry, it's been a real pleasure for me to talk with you and meet with you. And I certainly hope our paths somehow cross someday.
Pleasure. Where are you based, by the way?
I'm in Southern California. I'm in the Los Angeles area.
Okay. All right.
So, in my particular area, I have lots of hills to climb on my bike and ocean views while I do it.
Beautiful area.
What could be better than that, right?
Exactly.
I'm intrigued by your tours and I'm going to recommend them, but I already have two interviews that I've done where people just raved about the tours. So, congratulations on building such a fine tour company, Henry.
Thank you very much.
Wow, listening to Henry tell his story, I'm struck by how nonchalant he seems to be about all that he has accomplished. And I find that very refreshing. I'm certain you did as well. Anyway, thanks for listening all the way to the end. Listening to this podcast is enjoyable, entertaining, and informative, right? But watching the podcast is even better. Watching the video version makes you feel like you're in the room with me and my guests. Video versions are available on Spotify and also my Chain Wheel Diaries YouTube channel. Links below. Please like and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Brian Berlin, and I approve of this podcast.